Can you avoid arguments altogether? Could you have a discussion with someone without having an argument? I mean, we do that all the time. We have discussions without arguing with people, but then sometimes we get triggered or they get triggered and then it spirals and gets out of control. Can we change from that? Is it actually possible to have a relationship with someone and not have any arguments? Let's find out.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering a Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it is in your own selfish best interest to help others. And it is my great pleasure to have again and be discussing with, and as you can probably tell, we've been having a bit of humour before we hit record, Brenden Kumarasamy on the show. Brenda's an expert speaker, and I just love chatting with him. He's got so much valuable information, especially what we're here to talk about is how to communicate without arguing, because you've got a pretty impressive background, from what I understand, is in relation to your family dynamics, where you've never had an argument with your sister and mother, which is pretty impressive, I would imagine. Well, not I would imagine, it is. It's very impressive, because I know from my perspective, I certainly had my share of arguments with my mother and my sister. I've got two sisters, but on the same context, I've never yelled at my son. So I think we're in good company together to discuss this topic.
I don't think I'll be able to keep up the streak when I have children. I think the streak will die. I'm pretty sure I'll have to yell at my son a few times. If I end up having sons, you never know. Maybe I'll get a few daughters. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then yeah. Do you think there's a dynamic there that you've just mentioned from your perspective? Because you've got a sister and a mum, obviously. I think everyone's got a mum, I'm pretty sure. And but from that perspective, do you think that dynamic of it being your sister and your mum changed how you approach things, as opposed to, say, a dad, for example, or a brother?
I personally do think so. I just feel there's a different energy in how we approach a woman versus a man. Not always, but I don't want to generalize too much. But I do think in general that is the case. But I also will mention that in my case, I got really lucky with the two women I live with, right? Like my sister and my mom are fairly calm people. So when I mean we don't argue, I mean the argument doesn't last longer than a minute. It's usually like, oh, like, why didn't you finish this slice of pizza? Oh, because I didn't. Okay, like, doesn't matter. So it's all. So that's.
What you've just said there is really interesting, though, because I had that similar discussion. Because what you've said is, you said, why didn't you finish that piece of pizza? You haven't gone into a justification or an explanation or all that sort of thing. You just said, I didn't. And I'm relating that because I had a similar conversation with my dad. It was because they say, the boy doesn't become a man until his father dies. And usually from that perspective, I think the underlying part of that is the boy then makes his own decisions. He hasn't got a dad overseeing him so much, telling him this is what you should be doing, and this is how you should lead your life, that kind of thing. And from my perspective, my dad died metaphorically some time ago, and it was over a packet of chips. Because there was a time I was in between houses. I'd sold a house and bought a new house, and I had, the timing didn't line up. So I was living at my dad's house, and I was buying my own groceries, that kind of thing, because things I like, my dad and I some things we like differently. My dad's pretty frugal. He will always buy no-name stuff. Well, a lot of the times he'll buy no-name stuff. And I wanted, at that time, I liked Pringles chips. That's not it's not a marketing thing for Pringles chips. I liked them then. I don't eat them now. So just to put that in context, that's not product placement. I get no commission from that. Just to clarify, there's no commission for not selling Pringles chips. But from that side of things, I was in the kitchen and I was eating these Pringles chips, and I was just sitting there in the packet, just eating away, standing at the kitchen bench. My dad walks in and he said to me, "What are you eating those for? They're expensive." And I didn't argument. I didn't try and justify it. I just said, "I like them." And he goes, "Yeah, but they're expensive." And I said, didn't get emotionally attached or anything like that. I just said, "Yeah, I like them." And he kind of looked at me and went, "Yeah, okay," and walked away. But the thing was, the dynamic shift that we had from that point was it was as though he accepted I was an adult, even though I think I was like 35 or something at the time. It was a long time ago. So I was clearly age adult by some number of years, but it was almost as though from that point in time, I noticed our relationship changed a lot, where it became, that I was capable of making my own decisions, being responsible for myself, that kind of thing in his mind. And partly because I think without arguing about it, I just said, this is what's right for me. Just like what you were talking about with the pizza, you said, because I didn't, not justifying or anything like that. It's just, this is my position. And the reason I'm highlighting those two stories is because I wonder, with a lot of arguments, this is about, why didn't you do this, or you shouldn't do that? And we're putting it on the other person, as opposed to saying what it is that is right for us, saying, I would like this, this is important for me, and not imposing that on the other person, or the other person, if they attempt to impose something on you, you don't have to justify. You just say, well, that's just not right for me. This is right for me. Do you think that's part of that dynamic, if you were to think about that? I know that's a long-winded explanation, and as a public speaker, you're very into short, quick answers. And I'm trying to learn from that.
I'm used to your questions. That's what we're doing around two. So a couple of thoughts, Dave, man. It's a great story, by the way. I honestly thought you were 15 in that story, because you're like, yeah, it was a long time ago, I was eating Pringles. I was like, this guy's 15 years old. And you're going, I was 35 years old. I was like, okay. That's
well, remember, I'm 50,
Yeah, I always forget you're 50.
Yeah, I might. That's probably because I behave like 12. So.
It's okay, you're a big time CEO. It's good. So there's a couple of nuances with arguments. So the first one is exactly what you touched upon, Damien, which is learning to love people where they are, not versus where you want them to be. Because whenever we get into a place where we want them to be some way or live a certain life versus the fundamentals, hey, you should probably make a living. Hey, you should probably manage your money a little bit better. Hey, you should probably eat healthy, right? Minus kind of the simple ideas. But even some of those, I think it's really important to really love people where they're at. Like me and my mom used to fight all the time. Yeah, sure, we haven't argued in the last decade for sure. But before that, all the time. Yeah. Right, like my mom wanted me to be more religious. I wanted to go eat at my friend's house and eat their macaroni. She wouldn't let me. She would bicker all the time. And then one day we kind of sat down with each other, Damien, and we just said, okay, we didn't do it so formally, but it's something I did with myself, which is, I think we talked about it last episode too, but it's like the idea of relationship visioning, like writing out, what do you want that relationship to look like a year from now? Do you want it to always be like this, where you're always bickering for the rest of your life? Or are you going to take the time to write down, what do I want it to look like, and what do I do to achieve that? So what happened was, when I was 15 or a bunch younger, and we were fighting again over why I wasn't allowed to eat at my friend's house, I sat down with her and I just asked her a simple 3-letter question. Why, Mom? Why does this bother you? And I sat down, I just listened to her for 30 minutes. And when I did, it just made sense, Damien. She was in a civil war. That's why. She doesn't trust a lot of people. Doors were always closed, especially somebody who's not an ethnicity. We're not going to trust those people. But the background made a lot of sense. And then I was able to navigate that more effectively. And I got to eat at my friend's house. But I think the key is that why.
Was it the why, or was it also to the listening? Because you spent half an hour. You said you spent half an hour listening to what was important to her. Do you think that was part of, you were able to open the door for her, because you listened to her and she got that out, then she was able to be receptive to what you wanted as part of that process. Do you think that was part of that as well?
Correct. The only nuance I'll draw is take my stories with a grain of salt. So it might not have been in 30. Maybe it was 10 minutes, and I'm exaggerating to 30. But you get the idea. Because I was 15,
Don't
right?
let the
I'm not
truth
a
get in the way of a good story. It felt like
right.
30.
Right. It felt like yeah, it definitely felt like 30.
Felt like days, man. Oh,
It's been years. But yes, you definitely got the main idea, which is when we learn to, and I have some strategies we could share on that as well. How do you improve that? But the key is when we learn to listen more effectively to other people, it opens the door to them listening to our concerns, our needs, and then we met in the middle. Like now, my mom doesn't force me to go to a temple. She doesn't force me to do anything, except if it's very circumstantial, like it's very, very specific, and she's a hardhead on it, which is like twice a year, which I'm very open to. Like that's a fair compromise for me. But other than that, like yeah, she just lets me be the person I am, and that's how we've all lived kind of in harmony with each other.
Because I do wonder about that. I mean, the other comment I'm going to add to that is when we talk about the length of time of listening. It's interesting how that can seem like a long time when we're waiting to say what we want to say, whereas if we're actively engaged in listening to what they're going on and really taking that on board. And I'll notice, I notice this from doing podcasts from time to time. Sometimes I'll start a podcast and we've scheduled an hour and a half, and 10 minutes into it, I'm thinking, how am I going to make this go for an hour and a half? It's like, or even an hour or, half an hour to give the person respect for the time that they're committing to this. And it's too busy. I'm too busy focusing on what I'm thinking I'm going to ask. But as soon as I switch and then start to listen to what they're saying, all of a sudden, hour and a half's up, we're going into 2 hours with really interesting conversation because I'm actually not thinking about, what's going to go on here. I'm actually engaged with them. But how much do you think that process is about, switching to being really engaged with what the person is, and how do you think that affects your perception of time?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Damien. So I've found, my experience, it's really easy to tell someone to listen more effectively, but it's hard to bring that practical nuance. So I've had to really dig and figure out what's one strategy we can teach the world that will automatically pretty much guarantee an increase in that skill set. So I'll give you the strategy. It's very simple. I call it the goals call. And another principle of arguing that I'll mention as a frame, and the goals call kind of solves for that, is you always want to start by arguing easy things. You don't want to argue over like which country do you want to move to, which religion do you want to be a part of, how do you want to really raise the kids. Like these are big things. Start with the easy thing. Where do you want to go to a restaurant? Like, start winning those. Okay, what does alone?
What would you like
time?
to eat? I'm not hungry.
I'm not hungry. You've got more experience than I do in that domain, but you get the idea, Damien. So let's go back to the goals call. What is this? Pick one person in your life, not a million people, just one person. It could be your significant other if you have one listening to this. It could be a best friend, ideally someone who's more growth-minded, not someone who's more closed off, someone who's a little bit more growth-minded. So one example is, let's say you're listening to this very podcast with a friend of yours. That's the perfect person to do this exercise with. Here's what you do. For 45 minutes, you sit on a one-on-one call with them, and you just ask them, what are their top 3 goals for the years, and why are those goals important to them? And then you give them 2 minutes to write that. So let's say 3 goals. Okay, I want to have better health. I want to grow the business. I want a better career, whatever. You write the 3, and then they say what's important to them. But there's 3 things to point out during this call. Number 1, you are only allowed to either restate what they say. So let's say somebody goes with their top 3 goals. You go, okay, Damien, what I heard was this, and this is why it's important to you. Did I get that correctly? Restating. Or number 2, asking clarifying questions. Example, somebody says they want to get in better shape. What does that mean to you, Damien? Does that mean, or Jason, I'm not going to point you out, like Jason, once a week, because then you might assume
I can be self-deprecating. That's fine.
Right? It can be like, right, or something easier, right? You said you just got to point to a big role, right? What does that mean? Like, what are your revenue targets? What does that look like for you? What other goals do you have around that? So it's questions, But the third piece is the most important rule.
Mm,
You're not allowed for the entire duration of the call to give advice or to tell the
mm,
other person what you think. You're not allowed to do that. So literally, if we sat on a goals call for 45 minutes, I just
mm,
ask you questions and I restate, okay, that's what I heard. Here's another question for you. Here's another question. Here's another question. Not a thought. Here's another question.
mm.
And if you just do that with 10 other different people, your level of deep listening will skyrocket in a very short period of time.
Yeah. Do you think it is as simple as that? I mean, from my experience, all behaviors we have are habits generally. Well, they weren't habits initially, but they're currently majority of what you do is driven by habit. That's just what you do. And to change that, it's a matter of just saying, I want to do something different. And then again, going through that process of just repeating it, being consciously aware of it enough so that you actually do it. And then sure, if you do it enough in a short space of time, that habit starts to change, and it then becomes a new habit quite easily. Is my process. Do you, from your experience, is it that simple?
Yes, and I'll explain why that is. Couple
Mm,
of reasons. Obviously, it won't solve 100% of the problem, right?
yeah.
Because there's going to be how do we listen that we gets a little difficult, more
Mm,
trickier. How do you listen to somebody you don't want to listen to? That you're
yeah.
annoyed by, that you're frustrated by. So that's a different level, right? That's more advanced.
Mm,
But the beginning conversation that I think puts you ahead of 90% of people, frankly, is really taking the time to understand somebody's goals that you genuinely care about. That's why you're selecting people that you
mm,
want to listen to. You're not just picking random people off the street, though you could if you want to. You want to
mm,
challenge yourself. But I think the big one is really the people you already like. So what's nice about doing the goals call, Damien, is the reason it becomes a habit really fast is
yeah.
every time this happens at the end of a call, the other person just looks at you and goes, no one has really listened to me for 45 minutes before and has never really asked me these questions. Because
Yeah.
most people in the world, they don't invest in coaches because it's just financially it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
So because of that, most people when you do this exercise with them, they go, no one's really asked me about that goal that I had or that thought.
Mm,
And you don't need to be a coach to do this either, though. I want to emphasize this.
mm,
But what it does is you really make their life better. And
yeah.
what Ali Gadet says is when you help one person, the world gives you permission to help everyone else. So then you
Mm,
feel that motivation. You go, wow, did I really help that person? And then you go to the next person. You do the same thing for 45 minutes. You ask them what their goals are. And you just ask them what your question. You never give any advice. And at the
mm,
end, they go, oh, I never really said that out loud. I never said that goal. And that motivates you to actually do it more. So you feel the benefits of deep listening and the
yeah.
impact you're creating without even knowing anything, without even having a skill set besides the deep listening skill set that you're building for yourself.
Yeah. Do you think that's an art we've lost, this whole conversation, or lost or losing, or it's not something we have as much because of the social media that we have? And I'm asking from that perspective because I really don't use social media a lot. I make a few posts to people that I know that they and I want to help support what they're doing. So there's people that I'll actively go and when they make a comment, I'll make a or make a post, I'll go there and comment on what they've got to say as part of that support because that's my way of giving and helping. But I'm not actively using social media a lot. I mean, there's stuff that happens automatically, like when I publish a podcast, that's automatic. I don't actually do that. I set it up. I My podcast is set to go to air on a certain date and time, and automatically that'll go to my social media. So I'm not even doing that, and beyond that, I'm not really looking at it either. I'm not a person that looks at those metrics. Um, I just don't think it's helpful. So I don't look at number of views and all that kind of stuff. People ask me sometimes, and I go, I don't know. It's not it's not a metric for me. I know from the people that I'm interacting with, they're getting benefit of, and that's my measure. Um, but I find, because when I look at it, I know, I'll come to that point in a minute. I'm just wondering, is that social media aspect where we're pushing stuff out there, making comments and things like that, but we're not really actively engaged and listening. Do you think that's a skill that we've lost from this social media aspect where we're spending so much time? People wake up, first thing they look at is their phone and seeing what posts are there and then making comments, sort of thing, rather than actually having that, like you said. I mean, 40, to read something very quickly, which I'm sure is pretty cursory anyway, and then make a quick statement, or I'm offended by that, or something like that, which is it seems to be a lot of comments about that. That offends me. Um, is it, have we lost a bit of this, being able to interact like you and I? When we have this great, before we hit record, we were having this great banter and giggling and laughing like little children. And it was a great connection, where we really were relating to each other and listening to each other. That's why we were giggling and laughing, because we both related to what we were talking about. Do you think we need to just stop that social media? And I'm coming back to Crocodile Dundee, where they talk about, do you see a psychologist? Well, you probably don't have a psychologist at Walkabout Creek. And it's like, no, we just have Wally. You tell Wally, Wally tells everybody else, no more problem. When you have a problem, we just need to get that out in the open and have that discussion. Do you think we need more of that from your
For,
experience?
for sure, David. You're the only person I'll ever meet who can tie Crocodile Dundee to a communication question. Oh my God, I just like being on this intro just to hear you ask questions. I think it's so fascinating. But anyways, which is a whole other story for another day. But the main thing is, I don't think it's a lost art. I actually believe it's an art that we never really mastered as a species.
Okay.
That's what I would argue.
Yeah.
Except the reason this generation is struggling more with it, I don't think it's necessarily because of a generational difference. I think it has everything to do with optionality. So let me give a simple
Mm.
example to demonstrate this. It's very easy. So let's say 20 years ago, if we wanted to ask somebody on a date, not something I would know because 20 years ago I was 6 years old. So what did I know? But 20 years when you're eating the Pringles chips, right? And you're asking out people. Actually, maybe you
Yeah.
weren't. Maybe you were already in a relationship back then. I'm
Yeah.
not going to assume. But let's say, right, you
Yeah.
want to ask somebody on a date. The optionality. You cannot text somebody. You can't go on an app. You have to ask somebody in
Mm.
front of you. You have
Yeah.
to go out of your way. So the optionality, the convenience factor makes it so that you have to ask a girl out directly or a boy out directly. Whereas
Mm.
today, the optionality, the amounts of choices that we have is increased. So now you get to choose between ask a girl out in the wild who might already be in a relationship, who
Mm.
might not be interested in one, who might not even like your face, or you just swipe an app and
Yeah.
and if you get rejected, who cares? It's just an app. And you
Yeah.
barely even know who rejects you on the app. So it's more optionality. Human beings just value convenience above all else. So we've just
Mm.
opted in. Same thing with texting. 20 years ago, there's no texting. You have to get on the phone with somebody if you want to talk
Mm.
to somebody. Whereas now it's just easier. So I think there's a pros and a cons. The con is because we're savoring, we're enjoying that convenience a bit too much. We're speaking less on average, but there's also a double-edged sword, which I think is a massive benefit of social media that people rarely talk about, which is now it's a lot easier to find pockets of people that you can be really, really close to. Like some of
Mm.
my best friends I've met through podcasting, which is so random,
Yeah.
or random niche communities and personal development. But
Mm.
but the last piece here is social media is a tool that you need to know how to leverage. So if you leverage it in the wrong way, which is just savoring yourself and watching these videos and not really talking to people, you're not getting
Mm.
the full benefit. But if you actually attend the events and you meet people in person, it becomes a massive upside for sure.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned there about this wider reach, because I know from my perspective, through the technology, I've met so many people, and have great connections. Someone like yourself, have these great connections with globally that I probably never would have met, without that technology. And I think that's really, um, that in that capacity, it's really broadened who we can meet with. And I think also too, from my experience, because I've traveled a lot, I've been to 44 countries that I can count. I've gone through my photos one day, and I didn't really think about it. And one day I went through my photos, because you have where it is, and I've looked and gone, that's a country, that's a country. I went, holy shit, I've been to 44 countries. I don't consider shit to be an expletive, so that's just a general expression. So feel free to use that. But just clarifying that for the listeners, it's like if you don't like it, you can complain. I don't mind. Um, but what I've noticed with that is, because I've traveled so much, and met and talked with people, I've found that fundamentally we're all pretty much the same. I think we are the same. We want to enjoy our life. We want good things for our kids, and we want to have fun with our friends. at a fundamental level. And there's different cultures. And one of my business partners, he's from Iran, and he escaped from Iran with his family, but learning about, and for me, which is fascinating, that because when I grew up, my perception, and which was in the media, and it's been a while since, because we haven't had this for, well, 9/11 happened, but before that, when I was growing up because I was born in the 70s, it was a common thing where someone would get on a plane, hijack it, go to want to fly somewhere, and not fly into anything like happened at 9/11, but actually just go somewhere on a plane, and they'd hijack the plane, which is it's pretty extreme. But it seemed to be it was people from Iran. So my perception was that's what Iranians do, which is not true, and it's certainly not correct. And my friend Arash, who we talk with, and he's telling me about the Persian culture. It's such a deep and rich culture and the way people connect. It's just so fascinating. With around the world, we have all these people that are very similar at a fundamental level, and this technology enables us to communicate and share with that, again, the Wally principle from Crocodile Dundee. It's like the more we talk about it, the more people understand that we're not different. So there's no point, why would we fight against each other when we're fundamentally the same? And that's where coming back, and that connects to not arguing. If we, because you mentioned about, finding that connection and listening, and we were talking about that, but if we really connect on that level and go, hang on a minute, well, we're fundamentally the same. So what is it here? And that's where I found from, the people that I've met, it's like, it becomes more a fascination of going, okay, we're connected at this level, and we're the same. What are these differences, and how does that help you? Because and just learned so many wonderful things. The other component to that you talked about, and I love that you talked about meeting girls or vice versa, but we're both guys, so and we're both straight. Not and not that there's anything wrong with being straight. It's okay. Got to reframe it.
It's funny.
I have so many friends that are gay, and they're it's just wonderful that we have such a diverse culture with so many different things, and let's have some fun with things instead of getting so uptight, is my philosophy, one of mine. But I'm just thinking from that dating side of things, because again, for me, when I first started, well, I was interested in girls from when I was young. My first girlfriend was when I was in kindergarten. So I started early. That was literally our first kiss was Joanne in I remember. It was very special. I don't know if she remembers, but it certainly was special to me. I still remember that. But and I was just wondering from that perspective again, it's like, because we have I know from my perspective, when you put the technology in there, I can tell you from personal experience, sexting is nowhere near as good as the real thing. It's like, it is so much better to do the real thing. And from that side of things, I remember when I was kind of okay asking people to go out when I was younger. I wasn't, it was kind of, I think I was reasonably good at reading signals where, should have some indication that normally she's interested. She gives some sort of indication. And if you pick up on that signal, it's like, okay, I can, ask her out, sort of thing. That seemed to be the standard process when I was growing up. But when I was in the army, there was a guy that I was with in there, and he was a reasonably good-looking guy, but he was dumb. He was just really dumb. He was like, and he just wasn't that bright, in mine and my friend's opinion. But the thing was, he was always dating these amazingly gorgeous, beautiful women. And when I say gorgeous, beautiful, I'm not just talking about physically. These women were highly intelligent. They were doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. And they were really, really kind, nice people. So as a person, as a whole person, these people were just amazing. And I was trying to work out, how does he doing this? Because he said, yeah, all right, so he's good looking. Maybe he's got something a little bit extra down below that, is attractive as well. I don't know. But how is he doing this? And so one day I thought I'd ask him. So I went up and I said, Shane, I literally said,
I'm struggling.
I said, Shane, I'm not, you're not that bright, is what I said. How is it that you're dating all these great women? And he turned into this wise Obi-Wan type character. He put his arm around my shoulder and he goes, Damien, what you don't see is I ask a lot. Most of them say no. You just see the ones that say yes. And it was like this
Mm.
massive light bulb moment, not from just from a dating perspective, but a life lesson for me right there and then was just keep asking regardless of what you get. But I was just wondering from that perspective, is it something, I mean, do we need, because like you say, it's a swipe and you're not really putting much investment, your own personal investment in it, in the sense of getting that knockback. Because Shane didn't, and maybe it was because he was dumb that he didn't care. I don't know. Maybe when we're more intelligent, we get more attached to it and go, "Oh, I got knocked back," and whereas he just went, got knocked back, next person, and he had that approach. And I was just wondering how that dynamic has changed from when I was growing up and we didn't have this social media or even mobile phones, to now where we're texting and we're losing that ability to just go, hey, it's okay to get told no. We just move on. What's your experience in that side of things with connecting with, because you're younger than me.
A
I
little
think by
bit,
a
just by
long
a
way.
little bit.
I think by a long way, to be honest.
No,
I'm
just
an
a
old
few
fart.
months. Yeah, I mean, I agree, Damien. I think for me, you're right, especially this generation, but I think it's true across the board. There's that
Mm,
fear of rejection, right? About, oh
mm,
my God, this person is not going to like me for who I am and what I bring to the table. But I also think that's where the massive opportunity is. Like a lot
mm,
of guys, since we're both guys,
mm.
the example is a lot of us aren't even willing to, even if they get matched on an app, they don't just text the girl and just say, hey, let's just get on a 15-minute call. Like, who cares about texting? Like,
Yeah.
the relationship isn't just going to be texting all day. And most
Yeah.
guys aren't even willing to do that. They just play this texting game and try to get this person on a date. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. You just
Yeah.
ask, you just get on a call with them and schmooze
Mm,
them on the call. So I think for sure there's a lot of hesitation from
mm,
both sides a lot of ways. But I also think that's where the opportunity is, where it's a lot easier to. I actually argue that it's a lot easier to be Shane today than it was
mm,
20 years because a lot of people do, I have literally I haven't heard of a relationship where somebody just approached somebody else. Like if I think about every relationship that I know, I'm not
mm,
in one currently, but every
mm,
friend of mine that's in one, I don't know a single one of them where it was, yeah, I just saw her at a park and I just went up to her and said hi and I
mm,
started a conversation. It was either just like an online thing or as an introduction from a friend or there was a party that they all went to. So
mm.
yeah, it's very interesting. So yeah, I think there's a lot of options. I mean, a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, because I mean, this is a story that I've never told, certainly online. Uh, I
It's just us
remember like,
listening.
this
Don't
this
worry.
whole you mentioned about going out in a park and asking someone. There was when I was in the army in Perth, there was the pub that we used to go to quite regularly, the Cottesloe, which was on the beach. It was this beautiful, really elegant pub. So when I said pub, it probably doesn't do it justice by UK standards, but it was this really because when you think, I'm just thinking when you think of pub, it's kind of like this English style. Getting sidetracked there, my ADD kicking in. So but I was there and I was like, there was this girl at the bar, and I thought, I'm going to try this and see if this works. So I walked up to her, and I said, I started the conversation, just said, g'day, how are you? And we started talking a bit, and I had this plan from the start. I thought, I'm going to ask this question. And so after we had a little bit of rapport and things like that, I said, so would you like to go off and get it on? Yeah, basically go and have sex was my question. And she looked at me and she goes, yeah. So we walked off. So I've never asked that question again because I got 100% hit rate on that. But straight up, like, I mean, it's one of those, and that's where I was like, this dynamic of, because I was thinking about that from the perspective of, well, I'm not suggesting people go up and ask people in the park to have sex, but this whole opportunity of just, and I know from when I was single, because I was married for quite a bit of time, and either side of that when I was single. From a guy's perspective, there's so many really wonderful women out there. They're just like really kind, and they're like, and they're all, why can't I be a nice guy? And I'm like, well, I don't know, because to me, it's like I'm going, I'm a nice guy, and we've met, which is fine. I
I'm
can't
really
speak.
nice. I'm one of the nicest guys out there. Hi, my name's David Andrews.
Exactly, and so I was kind of like, I was really, I mean, I was fascinated by that from the perspective of, and then I'd meet other guys that, and they, the single guys going, oh, I can't find anyone. I'm like going, there are tons of really, really nice, like, and when I'm saying nice women, and it's true what they say about the quiet ones. They like being intimate. Those they just don't talk about it, which is that the librarian thing is so true. That's another story for another time, maybe on the R-rated version of this.
That I probably shouldn't be a part of because I don't have much expertise in this area, like Mr. David Andrews.
Well, remember, I'm 50, and anyway. But I was really fascinated by that. That we'd say people struggling to meet people, and that's where I was wondering. I mean, we'll circle back to the argument thing, no doubt. But I was fascinated, like from today's world, especially younger people, but even people my age. I'm going, there's so many people that, like, from a guy's perspective, I know there's so many really, really lovely, really generous, kind women that won't give you grief, that actually are really kind and will be very supportive of you out there. And I keep thinking of Shane. Just why aren't you going out and asking them? But it doesn't sound like, from your perspective, from what you're experiencing, that's something in your world as well. People are meeting. They might not be walking up to people, but they're being introduced other ways, and certainly meeting online. I mean, if you put yourself in a place where people are actually looking for the same thing, you've got more like chance of success. But is that, is it really as simple as that as well from the younger generations? It's just a matter of just go up and say, "G'day, how are you going?" "G'day," Crocodile Dundee.
For sure, David. Here, let me bring up the principle a little bit, because I think it's a lot more than just dating and women. I think it's more about how do we lead an extraordinary life. And the reason why most of us don't have an extraordinary life is because we don't seek one. We don't focus. We don't put that attention. And there's a question my coach dares me to think about all the time. And the question is simply this, Damien. What's one thing in my life that's not extraordinary right now? And it doesn't need to be something really big. Oh my God, I need to get married. I need to have children. I need to go have this big job. I need to 10x my salary. No. It could be like the pillow you're sleeping on at night.
Yeah.
Like, are you using the same pillow you've been using for the last 15 years? Or are you going to buy a new one for your head, or a brand new mattress, or something really small, or asking out that girl? And I think a lot of us, we settle for an average life, and because we all want to be like everyone else. That's the best way to survive. Whereas you and me, that little switch in our mind that makes us wired for survival, somebody took it out of us. That's why we do things, right, that most people don't do, but that's also why we get the results that most people don't get, right? So it's the same thing, right? Let's go back to Shane. He's got a couple of screws loose to build on your, like, to call your bluff here a little bit, but with him, right, because his brain is wired in a way where he's like, I just like women, right? He's just going to talk to a bunch of them, which is objectively the right thing to do. Like, from like just a numbers perspective, it just makes sense.
That's sales. It's a numbers perspective. It's like
same thing, right? It's and that also ties into business too, right? Actually, something we never talked about that I can jump in right now that I think you'll find fascinating is, I believe successful people have a very different relationship with failure than unsuccessful people do.
Is it failure that? We'll come back to that. Yeah.
We can come back to that. Yeah, sure. We can call it something else, right? Reps, trials, and tribulations. But the idea is simple. The principle is simple, which is, let's say we're running a business. We're taking 10 sales calls, and one of them closes. So one of them, you get the sale. So the person who's more of an average performer will go, "Oh my God, I'm so exhausted. 9 calls to get to 1 yes? I don't think I can do this. Like, why am I doing this job or this role or this company or this mission?" Whereas the person who's successful goes, Oh my God. Like I had to talk to 10 people to get one yes. Wait a second, let me do the math on this. So if I talk to 1,000 people,
Mm,
I can get another 100 yeses. Okay, if I talk to another 10,000, get 1,000 yes. That's exciting to me because if I sell a product for 2,000, I'll make $2 million this year. If I just talk to
mm.
3,000 people or something like that, you get the idea. So it's
Yeah.
just a relationship that we have with failure is just, I think, successful people just have a very different one than unsuccessful people do.
Is that I mean, from that perspective, how we approach it? Because I'm looking at it, because when you talk about 9 to 1 2, I mean, yeah, a lot of times it's a lot of effort that we have to put in to get the result. And I do wonder about that. And we're coming back to this whole listening, which is the point of the conversation is avoiding arguments. But I wonder about that from that perspective, because a lot of times when you're in a sales role, even in a dating role, when you're putting yourself out there, I mean, part of the reason I think you say being extraordinary. I mean, I believe you are extraordinary, and I'm you and everyone else listening and everyone else in the world. You just are, and I think we need to separate. For me, anyway, how I've done it is I've separated who I am, me inside, to my behaviors. One, I've done behaviors which are not extraordinary. They're quite horrible, actually, in things that I've done in the past. It's like, I've
All of
exploded
us.
at people and done and didn't think, but it's like I don't view myself as that is me as a person. That's just a behavior I did, and I've corrected it, and I moved on. Um, it took a while to move on, though, to be, for the listeners. And, when I was younger, I didn't realize that you can just let go, and you don't have to drag it around and go through this regression therapy and go, why did I do that? And what is my, in the womb, someone said something that connected, and you can. It's just a lot of effort, and I'm
It's a
lazy.
lot.
I like to find. I think I'm probably the most lazy person on the planet because I'm looking for the easiest way to do things. That's why I innovate so much. Um, and like from that perspective, I do wonder about this whole thing because I think I'm freaking awesome inside. Do I do everything that's awesome? No, I learn, but inside, I believe I'm an awesome person. Whether and when you look at it from that perspective, using what you said before, I made 10 calls and I got one sale. Oh my God, I failed 90% of the time. Well, that's your focus. That's you just I look at it and go, I got one. I got one. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm awesome. I got one. I had that when I was doing sale. I mean, it was like I failed and failed and failed and getting, using that terminology. I failed. So didn't get the sale, didn't get the sale. When I got the sale, I was like, yeah, got the sale. Walked in, got the next sale. And it's amazing, success breeds success. But I wonder about that too, how we can shift our approach. Because I remember reading, and I think it's in Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he talked about how to motivate someone else. And he gave an example of I think it was an Andrew Carnegie story, a great steel magnate from a long time ago. I can't remember when, but anyway, little Scottish guy. And he's I think it was his sister or someone was writing to their sons who had moved away from home and wasn't getting a response. And he said, I guarantee I'll write one letter and I'll get an immediate response. So Andrew Carnegie wrote a letter, hi, Andrew here, blah, 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 a bit of a story, and, talked about that and then said, yeah, look, and as a gift to you guys, I'm enclosing a $5 note for you, and sent the letter off. He didn't include the $5 note. He got an immediate response. Wes, thank you for your thank you for your letter, Uncle Andrew. We really appreciate it. Yeah, life is really good. Oh, and just as a note, the $5 note wasn't included, so he got an immediate. But what the principle behind that is that he found a way of what they needed to be motivated. And I mean, I used that just yesterday. And I wanted to contact a CEO about doing something with an organization I'm in charge of. And my message to him was, this is my position. I'm doing this, and your organization does X, Y, Z. And I think we can link that in there and get a national presence for your organization. Now, I want them because I want money from them and other things from them with their prestige. But I didn't ask for that. I just said I could help you get a national coverage and left it at that. I got a response within an hour from the CEO of the organization going, love to catch up. Because I put it in that terminology of what I want. And a similar sort of thing, if we take that from a scale as well for guys, because we talked about dating, I know from my perspective, I had a lot of success meeting and talking with women because I'm not doing the talking. Generally, I'm asking questions. Girls, and we know girls love to talk. There's studies that prove that they talk twice as much. Some will say it's because they have to repeat everything they say, which is fair enough. They probably do, because we're generally not listening. But I found from that perspective, if you're listening, which comes back to our point about arguments, if you're really listening to the other person, and then you can sell yourself in more because you're actually becoming more interesting to the person. Because I think you've heard before, if you want to be an interesting person, be interested. Is that, from your experience as well? When you link that back to your relationship with your mum and your sister, this part about whether you're listening, and then we'll get on to stating what you want later, but is that part of what you think is a foundational level? And, you have some practical examples as well with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Damien. I think that you really nailed it on the head. Yes, I do agree. Though you won't catch me publicly saying that. I think you might have a good angle there on women versus men and what percentage. I won't comment on that percentage too much.
See, I'm
But
old
what I
enough
will
not to care what other people think. You're not there yet.
not there yet. Still got a couple more decades to go. But here's what I'll say. Here's what I'll say. There's a very easy trick to being interested versus interesting that nobody does. Here's all you have to do, Damien.
Yeah.
Make a list of questions that you wished other people asked you in life. So I'm not the kind of guy you meet up in person, you go, how's the weather? Okay, like I don't care. Like look outside. Like right? That's why I like doing interviews with you, because you ask really nuanced, bizarre questions that I actually have to mind Jedi through as you're talking. And I love the challenge.
These are not the droids you're looking for. Or these are not the
Right.
questions you're looking for.
Yeah, I just love I'm just fascinated by your interview styles. That's why I like talking to you. But amongst other reasons. But I think the other piece is just simplify this. Just make a list of questions you wish other people asked you rather. So like for me, it's like I wish people asked me if they met me in person for the first time. Hey, what's your purpose? What are you excited about? What are you grateful for? What's a big lesson you learned about yourself this year? What are your 3 biggest goals this year? That's and what's nice about conversation, and you kind of hinted upon this, most people are lazy. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to ask them the question, you're going to listen to them, and then what they're going to do is they're going to say, what about you? So you're literally just to answer your own questions. And if they don't find the conversation interesting, it's because, or if they don't like your questions, it's because you're not meant for them. Just skip them and go to the next person.
So is that like when you do that, you've created it and you've written them down and you either memorize them or do you have a little cheat sheet you keep in your wallet or your pocket or something? How do you do that?
Right, so you can do that, and I have like a phone with these questions, but usually I don't formalize it too much. So let's say I'm meeting somebody new, I just ask them. I never say, "What do you do?" I hate that question. So I'd say something more like, "So what are you passionate about? Like, what are you excited about this week?" And I just listen and I just look at them, and they'll say like, "Oh, I'm building this thing," or "I'm doing this," and I just go like, "Tell me more. Tell me more about that." That's it. And then as the conversation flows based on the dynamic, if I feel it's getting dry, then I'll pop in some of those like what's the biggest what are your top 3 goals this year? What's the biggest lesson you learned about yourself? But a lot of the times, like with us, we don't have that, right? It's just it flows. So sometimes you just let it flow.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool because I've never really consciously thought about that. I've just asked questions of people. Well, I struggled when I was younger because I was always trying to think of what to say, what's really exciting to say. And then I learned, and I learned way too late in life, that what people remember, this was a big one for me, is not so much what you said, but how you made them feel. And when I learned that, that completely changed the dynamic of how I related to people, because it wasn't about so much me getting my opinion, because I was very opinionated. before. I was always right, and you should listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you're an idiot. Was my attitude. It was pretty bad. Um, but when I learned that it wasn't so much about, for most people, it's not about, because I'm very, as you know, very goal orientated. It's like I'm laser focused. Bang, I'm going there, and it's like I'm this D11 Caterpillar bulldozer. Just, I think I'm a bit faster than that actually, but I'm just non-stop. That's my focus. And then when I learned that it wasn't about, other people didn't think that way. They weren't so, because I thought everyone thought the same way, and I couldn't work out why they were struggling to get what they wanted, because they weren't really wanting to get there. They just wanted the connection. And particularly, and this is written about in Mars and Venus and stuff like that for those, guys listening on the dating side of things. I learned too late on. I don't, if your partner or girl's talking to you about, her problem, she's not asking you to solve it. Just shut up and listen. It's taken me a long time to learn that. Just shut up and listen. Don't even try as much as you want to. And I still feel it inside when I get asked that. I mean, when someone's, ladies talking to me, I want to solve the problem. And it's like, shut up, just listen, shut up. But from that side of things, I wanted to come back to, this part about with the argument side of things, and also this relates to dating as well, I think, is about saying what's right for you, rather than putting it on the other person. Because I think if you, and from my experience anyway, I've learned when you say, "Oh, why did you do that?" or whatever, I mean, and start especially getting defensive doesn't really help a lot. Blaming the other person doesn't help a lot because they're going to get defensive. I've found from my perspective now, if I just say, this is, like I said before with the chips, and you mentioned before about what as well, with the pizza, I just didn't do it. Rather than getting defensive or justifying or whatever, you just say what you want. And I found from that perspective, when someone gets upset about something I may have done or whatever, there's a potential for an argument, I just clarify and say, well, this is what I was wanting to do. This is what I was wanting to achieve. And rather than being defensive about it, I found that completely changes the dynamic. Now, we may not agree, but at the end of the day, especially given that we live in free societies, we have the right to do what we want to do. Now, if we disagree, then we go our separate ways, and that's fine. And I've noticed this from a lot of people if we're taking this even into the dating perspective, because we've covered that. If you upfront say, this is what I want in a relationship, and the other person doesn't want that, well, you stop wasting a lot of time with someone that you're not going to be with. Do you think from your perspective you found that dynamic changed? Because you mentioned before you used to have a lot of arguments with your mum and sister. Then you changed. Something changed. Well, then something changed, and I'm assuming you changed to change that dynamic. Was that a factor in you being clear about saying, this is what is right for me? I'm interested to hear what's right for you, and then we can find some middle ground if there is a middle ground. Is that, because that's what I did? I'm just wondering whether that was a similar sort of scenario for you.
For sure, Damien. So I think there's a little nuance, slight nuance between the arguments and expectation setting. So let's get into I think it's one and the same. There's like a small little nuance there I want to tackle. So the one piece around the arguments, here's what I'll say. It's a lot about conflict resolution and relationship management. It's all about like a bank account. Like, are you in debt, or do you have a lot of money in the bank? In the sense of, if you're making a lot of deposits in the relationship and there's a bickering, because there's already a lot of deposits in the relationship stands really well. The foundation is really good. But if there's no deposits and it's only arguing, you're getting into debt. So then what happens is those mistakes that you make, they forgive you a lot less. Versus if you did everything right during the year and you make one mistake over the trash. Like you take your girlfriend, your best friend on the best vacation ever. Like I write like handwritten letters to my family, right? Like you put in these.
I love that. That's awesome.
I don't do them a lot, to be honest. I probably did it once in the last 3 years. But it's one more than everyone else does. So what this is, you make massive deposits. So when something goes wrong in the relationship, it becomes a blip. Right? It's kind of like if you got $10,000 in your bank and you're making a $10 purchase, like who cares?
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of the big thing
Mm.
is doing those little things over time. And those
Yeah.
little things are not buy that person a house. It's whenever they make food for you, I always tell my mom, hey, thanks for doing that, I really appreciate
Mm.
it, right?
Yeah.
Smiling, saying good morning, that's the deposits
Yeah.
versus like not talking. The other piece that you tackled is expectation setting. So
Mm.
there's kind of two layers to expectation setting that I see. One is existing relationships, is one is new relationships. So let's tackle
Mm.
existing relationships. So existing relationships just means it's all about how do we set boundaries that are more effective. I'll give you an
Mm.
example that I think I mentioned last time around I need more alone time, right? That sentence can be misconstrued 100 different ways.
Yes.
Verse, right? You could say, you could interpret
You're
it
gonna leave
as,
me.
yeah, you're going to leave me to 15 minutes a day to read a book. So what happens with this is that's a great opportunity to actually cash in a lot of deposits. And here's how you
Mm.
do it. You just go up to your significant other. You don't even talk about you. You go like, hey, I listened to this podcast with Damien and this crazy guy named Brenden. They talked about boundaries. What's one boundary I can support you with this year? So what you're doing is you're
Yeah.
including a massive deposit. So it's not like, hey, I got a
Yeah.
boundary. I want you to
I
respect
love
me.
that. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, hey, what's one boundary I can help you with, Damien? You know,
Yeah.
like I know we've been, you know, like you build that relation. Everyone's going, oh yeah, like I'd love to have 30 minutes in the morning to like read a book or something. Absolutely, let's make that happen. So what happens is like
Yeah.
you're adding. So when you want to go on a trip with the boys, your wife isn't even like, yeah, do
Yeah.
whatever you want. Like you're amazing. So that's one layer. The other layer that you kind of touched on a little bit that I'm not an expert in, but I got from Patrick David is setting the expectation at the beginning of a relationship. So I'll tell you a
Mm.
story that he did that I think you'll find really interesting.
Yeah.
Is when he realized he wanted to get married, one thing he did, Damien, is he started dating multiple girls at the same time. But I
Mhm.
want people to hear this correctly. So he wasn't intimate with any of them. But
Yeah.
basically what he did, or at least what he says, who knows, but basically what he did, what he said he did anyways, and I'll take his word for it, is the first date he would just go on a date with them. He would talk to them. But after
Mm.
the first date, for the women who were interested in continuing to date him, he would give them all a book. And the book was called 101 Questions to Ask Before You Get Married. And he
Mm.
said, read the book if you're interested, because this is where I'm going. I want to be in a long-term committed relationship. I'm done with all the hookups, all that stuff. And he was serious about that.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the women go, no, that's not what I'm looking for. They would leave because you're setting the expectation at the beginning of the
Mm.
relationship. And
Yeah.
then the other people would go, yeah, that's what I'm interested in. And then he had like 6 hour, 7 hour conversation with 4 or 5 of these women to go through the book. And it was obvious that there was one clear winner over everyone
Mm.
else. And he's been married to Jen for like what, 17, 18 years now. And they're happy. They got kids and they're good. But that goes back to what you said, which is we have to learn how to deal with the relationships we already have that we can't remove. Like you can't remove your sister. You can't
Mm.
remove your mother in theory. So
Mm.
deal with it.
Some
Unless they're
people
super
try.
toxic. Some people, yeah. Unless you're like super toxic. But the relationships you can control, like a friendship, a romantic relationship, you want to apply a Patrick David-esque strategy to set better expectations in front.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the other component to what you said there. There's two things that I picked up from that is it was the simple things and shifting to the other person, and it was the notes that I made as you were talking. And I wanted the first one was I think we really underestimate the value of those simple little things, that connection. Because it's certainly from a guy perspective, I think we really do undervalue how important those little things mean, to the other person. And like you, it was like for me this year for Christmas, I decided to do something different because normally I buy lots and lots of presents, usually stuff that I think the other person wants. So it's more without intent. Well, previously, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how to word this, but it was I wanted to do great things and I'd buy all these wonderful presents and things that I wanted them to have rather than what they really wanted. And I think it was probably making people uncomfortable as well. And this year I decided I wasn't going to do it. And largely because I like lots of stuff under the Christmas tree. It was just my thing. I make this really awesome Christmas tree, looks fantastic, lights, ribbons, all these kind of stuff. And I love that. I really love that. And so to go with that, it's got to have lots of presents under there on Christmas morning. That's just what has to happen. And for me, it was a big shift this year to go, okay, this is probably more about me than it is about the other person, which was
Mm.
take responsibility myself. It's like that was a bit hard. Personal responsibility is probably one of the hardest things you can do. And then what I did was exactly what you were talking about. I wrote letters to the people that I care about. And it was amazing how much more of an impact that had. I handwrote a letter. It wasn't it didn't need to be a long letter. It wasn't pages and pages. I think the longest one was 2 pages. And it was just like, this is what you mean to me. I really appreciate that. I went to my mum, both my mum and my dad, I wrote them a letter, and they ate it up. They loved it. And it was really interesting about how something simple like that has a massive impact. And I'm all about that. I mean, that's what I have a program called Max Time, which is about how to get, well, I call it ROE, return on effort, the max amount of return for the least amount of effort. And that's why I can cram so much into a day. It's not because I'm doing a lot. I'm doing the key things that give me, it's not even the right terminology, cram so much into the day. I'm doing tasks which give me huge results. I get massive results from little tasks because that's how I set up my day. And it's really interesting to note, and I love that you've highlighted that, because I really didn't have that set out as well as you put it, is these little things that you do with people, these little appreciations. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that. And when something happens, every now and then I'll send my mum a message, just going, "Mum, love you. You're just a wonderful mum," and that's it. And it like you say, the love, that bank. And I love that description. You're talking about making deposits. That's a massive deposit. Coming back to what we talked about before, and something I learned way too late in life, was that it's not so much what you say, it's how the other person feels. That's what they remember. And these little things like that have so much more power. So I love that you brought that up in that conversation. The other thing, what I really loved about what you were talking about, is something that you want. And I love this. I actually hadn't done that into that, hadn't consciously thought about it from that perspective. But whatever it is you want, you ask the other person that what they want, the same thing. So I'm losing track of what the actual explanation you had, but just say you want to go out, and it's like, well, what would you like to go out and do tonight? And you're putting the question on them, but you're the one who actually wants to go out, rather than saying, but how much, when you talk about arguments, how much does that make a difference? If you're saying, if you're feeling like you want to go out and it's like, why don't you take me out? That's generally going to lead to an argument. In most, but if you say to the other person, what would you like to do? Where would you like to go out tonight? I mean, that has a presupposition to it that we're going to go out by itself, but it's a whole different dynamic of a question. I really love that from that perspective that you brought that up, as to how to, I'm linking it back to our topic of how to avoid arguments. And I love how powerful that is. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that, over your experience of things that you've done? Because that's awesome.
For sure, Damien, and I'm glad that resonated, brother. So there's kind of two thoughts that come to mind, and the second one I forgot. So let's go to the first one, which is something I taught one of my clients to do recently. And I'm not. Oh, actually, no, I just got the thought. So the advanced version of what you just shared is, instead of just going, which is great, by the way. Hey, let's go out tonight. It's great, and I don't do this perfectly, by the way. I'm not sitting here going that my sister thinks I'm the best person in the world. I highly doubt she does if you asked her. But
she wouldn't be your sister if she did.
Yeah, but I'm high enough on the list. Enough. Right? Where when, like, that significant other conversation, you add on top, I just really love spending time with you. You really brighten my day.
That's so cool.
Right.
I love it.
Right? So that's the other piece you add on top. What do you want to do tonight? Because what happens in that situation when you just say the question was like, oh, you're just going out with me because you feel you have to. So isn't that crazy? As men, we don't get this though. Because me and you,
it's so simple.
Yes. So it's very important for us as men, to understand the psychology of the opposite sex. Same thing for women. It's important to understand the psychology of men. Like, for example, me and you, if we don't talk for 6 months and we just text each other and we get on a call, and you already know where I'm going with this, and we talk, we're going to talk as if we've been talking for 6 months.
Yeah.
But that's not how women operate. There's a lot more emotional touch points. So if they feel they don't even talk to their girlfriend for 6 days, let alone 6 months, they feel like they're really distant. But by understanding that as men, we know that, okay, with our guy friends, it's like, okay, like Damien, I can text him once a month, or if I'm in Australia, I could text him, or if he needs something, like usually if we need something, we'll text each
Mm.
other or a catch up, whatever. But it's not like, okay, Damien, from this point on, we have to talk every few days. Like we just don't care that much as men.
Yeah.
That's one piece. The other piece that's really fascinating, I've done this with a few people, and I'll admit I haven't perfected this strategy, but it goes a long way and touches really the self-awareness, that great share you had around, hey, wait a second, I bought these gifts because I like gifts, but not necessarily
Mm.
because the people around me like. And the story that Patrick shared, which is very similar to yours, but a little more accentuated and created a lot more problems than in your case, which was there was a couple, and there was a very busy husband who worked all the time, and a
Mm.
wife that obviously loves him, and she was talking about, hey, like, I want to do something more with you, things like that, and he had the brilliant idea of buying her a diamond ring. So he goes to this diamond store, he buys like
Mm.
a $15,000 ring, and then he
Mm.
gives it to her, and she looks at him and says, I don't really care about the ring. Why don't we get picnic? And it infuriated him. He's like, what are you talking about? I spent $15,000 on like, I care so much about, versus going, what does she care
Mm.
about? So how do you do this? The way you do this is through Gary Chapman's love languages. So for
Mm.
those who don't know Gary's love languages, they are, and I'll butcher this, physical touch, acts of service, gifts, words of affirmation, and quality time, right? So acts of
Got it
service,
right.
just, yeah, I got it right. But so that's one thing a lot of people don't know, but here's a fun thing you could do with the people around you. You give them these 5 things. You go, acts of service just means like you do the dishes for somebody. Okay,
Mm.
you bring them to the airport. Quality time just means obviously quality time. You go out to a picnic with them. Gifts just means obviously you buy them gifts,
Mm.
self-explanatory. Physical touch, hugs, kisses, high fives, and words of affirmation is you compliment them. So what
Mm.
you do is you explain these love languages to them, and then you ask them to take 5 minutes and order them in their level of importance. So what
Mm.
happens is if that couple did that, that woman would have reordered it, and gifts would have been way at the bottom, and
Mm.
quality time would have been number 1. Like when I
Mm.
did this exercise with me, acts of service is at the top of the ladder for me.
Mm.
Quality time, words of affirmation is really low for me.
Yeah.
Physical touch is the second. So when you do that, you have a better understanding of how
Mm.
people receive and feel love. Like my sister, she doesn't care about gifts. Right? So I never
Mm.
buy her anything unless it's like really infrequent. But she likes the quality time. She likes
Yeah.
the words of affirmation. So I'll do that a lot more, and that's really the key. We love people how they want to be loved versus how we like to be loved.
You've just hit on that really, and for me, made me aware of exactly why I bought people gifts, 'cause I'm off the chart, 'cause I've done that test on words of affirmation. I was giving gifts to people because I wanted them to tell me how great I was. So
I love
when
that.
if I'm gonna be as you were saying that, I'm thinking, "That's why I was doing it." That's on But I love the other point. I wanna touch on this again for the guys out there, 'cause it was always one thing that's always fascinated me, and from my experience anyway, was, when we're talking about relationships, and there's people, you always meet the people that say, "Oh, the passion dies after time," and we were talking about the intimacy component here as well, well, specifically the intimacy component. People go, "Sex dies after a while," and I was always fascinated by that, because I'm going, "No, it doesn't. It actually gets better. It should get better." Was my experience in the long term relationships I've been in. That's been the case. Um, and because people say, "Oh, women aren't as interested in sex," is a common thing as well, and I think biologically, that's not true. I mean, both are equally as interested and driven to do that for biological and survival of the species reason. It's just how we interpret that, and I love what you were talking about this, needing to be close, and a little tip for guys out there is certainly in the moment or shortly. Two things. One, women come down slower than men. So after she's had an orgasm, she's high on full of oxytocin, connecting drug, and she comes down slower. You roll over and go to sleep, she's going to feel abandoned. The best thing, even if you fall asleep doing it, just hold on to her. It's like, and I've done that, I've fallen asleep, and they're just sitting there looking, and wake up and go, "Oh, you're still looking at me," but you're still holding each other. But the other thing to do is, in the moment, and certainly afterwards, is say something along the lines of, and this is why you're doing it anyway, so it's not lying or anything like that, you're actually saying what's really going on, is I love being close to you. It's amazing how much then they will, you get what you're talking about is being close. You mentioned those words about being close. In those moments, if they feel close, they're going to want to do it. And that's real life experience. That it gets better as it goes along. If you create that connection, but if you're doing it for your thing, as you say, and it's not hard. How hard is it to say I love being close to you? Even if you're tired and exhausted and all sweaty, you can still go, I love
being close to.
Exactly. It's not that hard.
While you're munching on some Pringles chips. Hey, I thought we said we're not eating
exactly.
this. You're like, oh, sorry.
It's better than cigarettes. But it's funny how we do that from that perspective. And we're coming from the argument side of things, which is, we've gone on tangents here, but I think it's all related. That underlying, it's about listening and being clear about what it is that's right for you, rather than telling the other person what they've done is wrong. Because there's a lot of that where I find people, they'll say, oh, what you've done has offended me, or I'm upset by that. Your behavior upsets me. Well, it's you're upset with my behavior. That's a different way of refraining it. Because I know when someone does something and I go, I don't like that. I don't say to them, they shouldn't be doing that. I say, hey, I don't like that behavior. And if you want to do that in my presence, I'm going to be elsewhere. So we have a thing to do here to work out how we're going to deal with this situation. And when we have the discussion, and if they say, I'm going to do it anyway, then that's fine. You have the right to do that. That's why we live in a free society. You have the right to do that. As long as you're not hurting anyone. We've got those caveats. I think that's a general assumption that we're taking with that.
Sure.
But it seems to be, because we've got to wind up shortly, is it really about those two components, or is it, if we're at a high level, I know there's a lot of nuances and we've covered that, and I'm sure there's much more we can cover, but is it really, from your perspective, is it about really just, one, listening, and two, being clear about what is right for you from your perspective, and then adjusting what you need to do around that?
Yes, and I'll give some tough love as well. Yeah. I personally feel, Damien, all the points you hit were absolutely fantastic. And then the other point I would add on top is I really feel most of us take a relationship for granted. That's why these problems ensue. So there's two parts to this game. One that's much easier to do than the other.
Yeah.
Because I bicker all the time with my business partner, though I love him. I wouldn't trade him for anyone else in the world. Vamsi is the best. Right, we have a weird relationship for those who didn't listen to part one. So Vamsi's 20 years older than me, and he's my business partner. Right, so he's in his 40s, I'm in my 20s, but we're co-CEOs. So it's a really interesting relationship. So we bicker, but for me, there's two pieces, and one that I would urge your audience to do, Damien, that builds the foundation to everything that we talked about: the boundary setting, the listening. Because we both clearly have done a lot of homework. I think that's the big arcing thread here. We're really putting that attention, and I
think you listen more as a young person, because mine's through experience and hard work and failing a lot.
Oh no! I've had the failures. I've just had them earlier in life. That's all.
Probably.
And I found more people. Yeah,
than I did at your age, certainly.
Right, because I'm giving the impression that, oh my God, my relationship with my sister and my mom is like perfect, and it isn't, right? Like there's obviously things I can work on.
I'm not taking that away from. I think what you've done is you have a very functional relationship with other human beings, which is wonderful.
Absolutely. Which brings us to, and thanks for that, which brings us to the I guess the concluding remark, which is two parts. One is I would implore everyone listening to this to really write down the relationship vision. Really sit yourself down, 1 page per relationship, in order of the people you really care about maintaining a relationship with. So don't focus on the toxic people and you're like, oh, how do I deal with that? Don't worry about that. Practice on the people that are really amazing that you're not pouring into. Because I can pretty much guarantee there's so many people in one's life that are amazing, that are fantastic, that we are just not pouring into. They're not pouring energy, resources, time into, right? And that's the first step, is really taking a page and writing down for that one person, how do I want that relationship to feel, look like? And then when we write that down, it creates the motivation to say, you know what? When I'm in bed with someone, I'm going to say, hey, I like being close to you. We're going to put that extra effort in because we know what we want that relationship. That's the one piece. The other piece, which is a very dark way of seeing things, but it's helped me tremendously, and I don't expect most of the audience to implement. So for most of you, just stick to relationship visioning. The other thing that I do that's very dark, Damien, is I imagine myself at that person's funeral. Is I really take the time, like, and I told Vamsi this because he asked me this he's also my coach as well, which is really interesting. So he's my coach and he's my business partner. And he asks me every year, hey, what feedback do you have for me as your business partner? Is there anything you feel I should be doing better? Do you think there's any issues that we can talk about this year? And there's honestly never, except like little bickering. Hey, like we shouldn't have coached that client that way. Like, who cares? They're getting the result. It's just bickering over nonsense. But you know what I told them? Genuinely, Damien, I sent him a voice note and I said, you know, the reason I never bicker with you and ever trying to get in fights is because I always think about the end of your life. And I'm sitting there, and one day in our life, Vamsi, I'll be the only CEO of this business because our biological age is too wide, right? It's too wide. It's 20 years. So that means when I'm 55, that and I really do hope that he's alive when he's 75, but he definitely won't be coaching that much at 75. So, or when in longer, let's say it's 95, the day that he passes, I'll be 75, let's say. Let's hope he lives a long life. There's going to come a day where you won't be there anymore. And I want us to, not us, I do this, and you don't have to do this, but I would reflect on those moments and go like, wow, he's done so much for me, and I don't do anything for him. And I know at that funeral, I would have told myself the big thing, I really should have done more when he was alive. And I'm not saying that forces me to like start buying him flowers and kiss babies. Like, that's not the point. But that frame humanizes my energy with him. It makes me go, you know what? Even if when I feel like yelling, I really shouldn't. Because the time that we have is really limited together. And I look at it more from not like a day-to-day, but more like me and Vamsi have like 30 years together. So let's really enjoy that. And it's also the reason why I made the decision to live with my mother, right? Because that timing, because we have a 30-year gap. I mean, 26-year-old gap, actually. When I say 30, I clearly don't know how to do math. So yeah, 26-year-old, because I'm 26. So it's the same thing, right? It's like one day, I had a little spurt there.
I know. But, you gave that fine print at the start. Your numbers get a little bigger. So
yeah, they get a little bigger. Yes, true. Fair enough. So it's the same thing, right? I think about her life and I go, she's going to live a long life, right? That's what I'm hoping for. And she's not in anything bad or anything, but it just makes me think of like, whenever I'm mad at her, not mad, but whenever I want to bicker with her, I always opt not to, because I always think back to that last day and I go, you know what? When she's gone, I want to reflect on the relationships I had with her and smile and not be sad about it. And I feel if we had that frame, it would change our life. But I wouldn't recommend that for most people. You got to go through some deep work to get there. But do the relationship vision to get the bare minimum.
I think that, but it's a focus of being grateful for what is there. I mean, maybe you don't have to take it all the way to the funeral for people that might be difficult for, but being grateful for the person in that moment, going, well, even though we're here, what is the thing that I'm grateful for about them might shift that dynamic for them as well. But I really love that, and I'd really encourage people in the audience to reach out to Brenden for the relationship visioning experience, because I'm sure it'll give you a completely different framework and help you move forward. So that's my little plug for your business, Brenden, because I think the work you do is amazing. It really is really amazing. And I'm so glad to have met you and to be able to share this time with you.
The feeling's absolutely mutual, brother. I must say, I've been on so many podcasts, and you're the one I have honestly the most fun with, because I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, I just come and I have no idea, and there's so much enjoyment because I learn so much, right? With the banter that we have, it's like, oh, Damien's going that, and then I'm thinking as I'm answering it, why is he going in that direction? And it's super fun. I just really enjoyed this.
Cool. Thanks again, Brenden. Look forward to catching up with you again soon.
For sure.
Think Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.